Welcome to the 775 Alive podcast, your rural Nevada headquarters for decoding politics, economics, and general global shenanigans. I'm Crystal Newton, your business strategist, breaking down why Nevada's hustle is stronger than a sagebrush root in a windstorm. Here with my trusty co-host, Scott Gaborski, PhD historian, here to explain the smart lessons of history, even if we are likely to ignore them. Grab your boots for a wild ride through today's most important news.
Okay, today we're talking about the government shutdown. Is it as dramatic as they say, Scott?
Yeah, and now it's going on. We're probably almost 3 weeks into it when we're recording this, so it's one of the longest ones in history, third longest, I think, and pretty significant because it's a whole government shutdown.
Yeah, and there's a lot of aspects to talk about. We're going to dive into those, but first, I just wanted to talk to you. I'm back down in Sin City, and we are still working with Clark County Republicans trying to figure out how to win the Nevada legislature. And last week, I'm sure a lot of people heard the Katie Porter interview, which is an amazing example of why you don't want one-party rule in your legislature. So I wanted to play that and discuss that with you just a little bit before we get into the government shutdown, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
What do you say to the 40% of California voters who you'll need in order to win, who voted for Trump?
How would I need them in order to win, ma'am?
Well, unless you think you're going to get 60% of the vote. So you don't think
I feel like this is unnecessarily argumentative. What is your question?
Well, to those voters. Okay, so you...
I don't want to keep doing this. I'm going to call it. Okay. Thank you.
You're not going to do the interview with us?
Nope, not like this. I'm not. Not with 7 follow-ups to every single question you ask.
So Scott, I don't know about you, and I tend to get a little bent out of shape about attitudes like that coming from our leadership. How did that hit your ears?
Well, what it sounds like a lot to me is exactly what one of our former governors did. Of course, Porter's running for governor of California. But if you remember, Steve Sisolak, the governor before Joe Lombardo, during COVID, right, in 2018, made the statement that, he really didn't need the rural counties to win. So he wasn't going to pay attention to them, and he's never visited them, right? We've never seen him here in Elko County. And, it was a disaster. He got punished for it very strongly in the 2022 gubernatorial election.
And what are we talking about here? What we're talking about is once a state legislature reaches one-party rule, they really have a lot of leeway in terms of redistricting to make it almost impossible for the opposing party to ever get back in power. So what you wind up getting is leadership that has no reason to work with the other side because they don't need them. They're going to get voted in no matter what. And that's something that we're teetering on the edge of in Nevada. And I know the whole country thinks of Nevada and Sin City and cowboys and farmers, and we've got a kind of a red reputation. So if it does turn permanently blue, we're talking about a permanent change in direction in the culture of the state. And some people aren't happy with that.
Well, I think it's a much broader problem because I think one of the things we're seeing generally is the fact that the country is actually almost still 50-50, right? Now, of course, here in Nevada, the Republicans have just taken the registration advantage over the month of September, but it's only by a couple thousand votes, right? But we have almost near supermajority status in the legislature because of how the districts are drawn. And this is really sort of a big problem because if we look at the constitutional system as set up, right, to protect minority interest and protect minority rights, that becomes hard to do when minorities don't have a voice in government at all, right?
Right.
Which interestingly, bringing us back is exactly what Chuck Schumer is claiming here as part of the reason for justifying the shutdown, right? You have a Republican in the White House, a Republican Senate majority, barely, and a Republican House majority. But the government shut down because that Senate majority needs 60 votes to clear, and Schumer's blocking it, saying we need to negotiate, we need our sort of input into this budget that just got passed, right?
Yep. And so the Republicans keep using this this phrase, continuing resolution. I was hoping that you could, I feel like I have a good understanding of it. To me, it sounds like it's the bill that they pass every time to keep the government running. And for some reason, or for the stated reason you just said, the Democrats decided that they weren't going to vote on it until what? What's the holdup?
Well, that's a good question. So just first part of
subsidies, right? Is that what we're talking about?
Well, it's continuing Affordable Care Act, Obamacare subsidies, right? Now, some of this is actually tied in, and there's a lot of stuff about the illegal immigrants, but a lot of this is tied in with this continuing resolution. And again, I think one of the things that's vitally important to bear in mind on this uh, is that one of the things the Republicans actually got done is they have 12 budget bills that they pushed through the House, right? That's regular budgeting order, which is the first thing we haven't, I mean, by the September 30th deadline, they had 12 budgets ready to go. What we've seen in years past, well, last year's a good example. That big beautiful bill that gets passed right before July 4th was actually the budget that was supposed to be done by September 30th, 2024, right? And it doesn't get passed to July 2025. And that's been sort of the constant problem we've seen develop here over the last few decades. Now, what a continuing resolution does is it's actually the means that that's done, right? So they'll just say, okay, we're still working out the budget. So we're going to continue funding the government at a certain level they agree on. Now, this one's a clean one, which means basically what was offered in this continuing resolution is that the government would continue to be funded as through the budget of 2024 that was passed in July, right?
Right.
So it would just continue until November 21st. So right around the Thanksgiving break would be the
Yeah.
Thanksgiving recess.
Yeah, Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, recently spoke. I think it was yesterday. Well, it's Monday, October 21st, right now, the time of this filming of this episode. But
October 20th,
October 20th, correct.
the day ahead.
October 20th. Mike Johnson had about a 2.5 minute speech that really encapsulates what you're talking about, because there is a technical understanding of what's going on, that there's a continuing resolution, that there's budget items, it's been passed before, which kind of leads you down the path of way of understanding that this is more of a political stunt.
Mhm.
And then after that clip, I think we need to talk about the political ramifications, which might be the bigger impact, but there are some very real issues coming up, especially with like SNAP benefits and military.
Oh, yeah.
But if I may, I'd like to play what Mike Johnson had to say about what this government protest is really about.
Okay, go ahead.
For those of you that are keeping track, this will be day 20 days since the Democrats recklessly shut down the United States government. And the Democrats are making some very costly history here. Don't lose that in all that's happening. This is now the third longest shutdown in history. And when you look at it carefully, it is now already the longest full shutdown of all time. You had an example in 2018, and you had one back in 1995 that were longer, but they were partial shutdowns because they only affected a part of the federal government. This is everything. And it's also important for us to note, this is the first time in history that any party has had the audacity to shut down the government over a totally clean, nonpartisan continuing resolution. This is a political stunt, and it's the first time it's been done. And it is the most costly, most selfish, most dangerous political stunt in the history of the United States Congress. Because as we have stood here day after day after day explaining all the Americans who are being harmed by this nonsense. And the Senate Democrats have zero shame about this. They don't have any shame at all about the pain that they're inflicting upon hardworking families, upon soldiers and law enforcement officers and veterans and the elderly and the disabled and women, infants, and children. Services to all those categories and paychecks to those folks are being stalled because Democrats are playing games. Today, Leader Thune in the Senate will once again bring the clean, nonpartisan CR to the floor for a vote. They will have another chance. Democrats will have their 12th opportunity to pass the bill. It is the same bill that they themselves supported just 7 months ago, and Chuck Schumer gave impassioned speeches on the floor about how it was the only option. And don't forget, they did it 13 times under the Biden administration. Very similar measures, but not now. Something's changed. Over the weekend, we saw what it was all about. The Democrats made crystal clear that this is about politics. The politics were on full display. The politics, the spectacle, is what the mobs, the crowds, the rallies this week were all about.
Okay, so I'm a little confused, Scott. I'm really trying to get to so the narrative from the Democratic side is that Republicans are trying to rip away healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the narrative?
Well, it's a little bit more. It's a little
How
bit
are
more.
they justifying this?
Well, a couple things. So the healthcare subsidies and what the Democratic counterproposal would have done. I mean, the 12 budget bills that are in the House that the House put forward do make slight cuts to the federal budget. The Democrats want a 1.5 trillion added to the budget, right? And the
Okay.
Republicans are like, we're not going to do that.
That's why they call it the dirty CR, because they added
Well,
some to
no, 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 no. That has nothing to do with CR. So there's two things going. There's two main points of contention on this. The first about the healthcare subsidies is during the COVID subsidies under the Affordable Care Act, there was additional subsidies given to states to allow people to purchase the insurance under the Affordable Care Act. The problem is those were set up to end in 2025. They were going to end with the 2024 fiscal budget, right? That was set in the law the Democrats passed when they passed these.
Right.
Okay.
This was their planned ending point. The Democrats planned for this to happen.
Well, what might actually been happening is that's what it was put in to pass, and they just assumed it would be continued. That those things, because this is a continuation of what was a temporary program. Now, one of the things, and this gets into a much bigger issue, is it doesn't look like that Affordable Care Act is all that affordable. I mean, now we're 15 years, 16 years into the Affordable Care Act, and it looks like a disaster, right? It hasn't reduced prices.
I heard a statistic the other day that that it is 80% underwritten by the taxpayer.
Oh yeah,
an 80% subsidy to make it work.
Right.
That's in my mind, that's a failure. Oh my God.
Well, it is a major failure, and those insurance premiums are going to go up. But again, it's not that the Republicans are cutting a program that's existed for a long time. They're just continuing or refusing to continue to pay for it because the cost is too high. Right.
Right.
Now, that's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin has to do with this issue the Republicans set up front about health care for illegal immigrants.
Yes.
And that's really the one that has blown up. And
$350 billion over 10 years. That's what we're talking about.
Well, but it's not direct payments or not quite. So that's one of the problems. And I think a lot of the whole thing with this is that a regular budgeting order, as opposed to these omnibus spending bills, which have become standard in Washington, right? The 2,000-page bills where they get 72 hours to vote on it and nobody could possibly read it.
Right.
So nobody knows what's in it. I think what's happening is when you get into regular budgeting order, which again, the Republicans did this time around, you're starting to see a lot of problems. So the problems coming in from this is twofold. There is a 1980s law that says persons in the United States illegally are ineligible for Medicaid, Medicare, all that. Nobody's arguing about that, right? But what happened is there's also another law that was designed to protect hospitals against indigent patients who couldn't pay. Right. That the federal government would backstop that. And that is independent of citizenship status. Right.
Yeah.
And that's probably not a bad idea. Right. You don't want somebody being absolutely refused service, even though legally they can't. But this was a way to sweeten the pot. And again, this is another decades long law. What seems to have happened, right, is that states like California that have declared themselves sanctuary states, part of them appealing to people who are in the country illegally is like, well, if you come here, go to the emergency room, it's okay. The federal government will reimburse the emergency room for your care, right?
Yes.
And that's
the most expensive form of healthcare, by the way.
And that's one of the biggest problems we have is that emergency rooms aren't designed to be used for these general care. So you've got doctors that are trained in trauma medicine answering stuff like, here's an antibiotic for a cold or something. It's just insane. But one of the things that would probably happen, these people are going to still continue to get care. But what the Republican argument is if somebody's illegal and they go in for that, the federal government won't reimburse. And again, Department of Health and Human Services has a tracker, right? That's where these numbers come from. They know how much is actually going to illegal aliens. And what the Republicans have said is we're not going to federally backstop that. What that means is that the states would have to absorb that cost. Right? So the people are still going to get the care. It's just instead of spreading it across 50 states, California is going to be on the hook for providing that care in their hospitals. And their internal spending on that has more than tripled since 2020.
Yeah, it's odd. In some ways, the Democrats trying to get an allowance for illegal immigrants to be on Medicare would actually save us money because they're not going to the trauma ER room for regular medical issues on one plane. But from 30,000 feet up, it's like we shouldn't be paying for illegal immigrants at all, right? And you don't want to have ERs turning people away. So that kind of leaves you with one choice, and that's to deport illegal immigrants. And that's part of the argument we're always trying to make as conservatives and Republicans is the compassionate thing to do is to deport them because of situations like this, where we can overburden our healthcare to the point where no one in our country can afford healthcare, and they're trying to get emergency room care. It sets up these conditions. We're not equipped for it. That's why it's no good, right?
Right. And well, and there is one little minor thing I'd like to get back to the illegal immigrants here in a sec, but just to continue with that big thread, I don't know if jumping to deportation is really the thing. But
well, the argument that in some ways it's compassionate, and like the other side seems to think it's the worst thing you can do. But from some arguments and some levels, it's our legal system can't bear it, and it's more compassionate to give them a place where there's a legal space for them.
Well, and this
country.
Well, and this is part of a broader issue. Is that one of the things we're seeing with illegal immigration in this country is these people are utterly unprotected across the board, right? So one of the things that's come out about some of these IHS not IHS, sorry, ICE, these ICE raids. You had that one in California at the pot farm where there was a bunch of underage laborers. Right, kids that are being used. They might be, I haven't heard any follow up. They could possibly be all these kids that were lost under the Biden administration. Right? How is that protecting anybody? How is leaving illegal immigrants? Because technically, they're not supposed to be able to get jobs. Yeah. Right. So we're not protecting them. That makes them subject to crime. That makes them subject to trafficking. If they are taking illegal jobs, that allows employers to take advantage. So what's the benefit? And that's even before we get into access to social services. One of the things that used to remind me is we used to travel to Britain,
right? Huh? Even the census.
Well, even the census, right?
Accurate data. It's like
right.
You need a legal space in a legal country. It needs to be
right. But I know years ago when I used to go to Britain, for instance, right, when you went through customs border patrol there in Britain, they'd stamp your passport, and it said right on the stamp, right, not eligible for National Health Service services. Mm-hmm. So if you went to a hospital, even if you got in a wreck and an ambulance picked it up, you were personally responsible. Right. We had this. Now, the wrinkle in this that's going on is the fact that the question is the status of a lot of these asylum seekers that were brought in under the Biden administration. Because technically, they're not U.S. citizens. They haven't gone through the naturalization process, but they're not illegal in the same way that somebody who's jumped the border 5 or 6 times. And the Democrat argument is the big, beautiful bill had provisions that stripped, that sort of moved them over into the illegal immigrant category for these reimbursements.
Mm-hmm. And I know the Supreme Court's back in session. Is there something up and coming that's going to address whether that asylum claim is valid or not?
There might be. I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah. Right. I really feel there's a strong argument for it to be invalid. And the reason why is I remember us talking about this before. And anytime you give the allowance for an asylum claim, you have to also build the infrastructure to process the asylum claim. So the fact that he made an app that people could make a claim, but then funded and didn't create any new system to be able to take on these people, I think it's going to be ruled it's not a legitimate claim because that infrastructure wasn't there.
Well, and I actually think this is a bigger problem. And again, when Mike Johnson was talking about this weekend, he was referring to the No Kings protest, the third in the series of the No Kings protest. And one of the interesting things about this that's really has complicated is that refugee status. Back in the late 70s, Congress transferred the designation of refugee status and gave it to the president.
Okay.
So the president can set what counts as a refugee. And that's what got used by the Biden administration. And I'm using that term specifically because I actually don't think it was Biden himself. I think members of that administration used that power to create this broad range of refugee status with the understanding that, they're refugees, therefore they'll eventually become citizens. And that's really the sore point because a lot of people are, looking at this and like, these aren't the Vietnamese boat people, which is
Right.
why the Carter administration was given that power, was to declare, if I remember right, to declare these people who had fled Vietnam and were living offshore on boats to be claimed as refugees because they didn't quite fit into the categories the naturalization service at the time had. But
This
that's
is the
not what
first
went
I'm
on with
hearing
this.
of that. I didn't know
Yeah, no,
that.
no. This is
Oh
again.
no.
I mean, this is something that happened almost 50 years ago. This is another one of those institutions that, even though it was designed to address a specific issue, has now been used more and more broadly.
Yeah.
And we're going to see some pushback at that, because I think if there is a case, one of the questions is going to be, if the president has the power to designate refugees and not designate refugees, um, what's to keep a president like Trump saying that he's not going to recognize the refugee status granted by an earlier president,
Yeah.
right? And Congress has said the president has that law. We're
Do we
getting
have
ready.
anything coming down the pipeline that can clarify this?
Not yet, but it's going to happen. One of the big stories that came out just this weekend on this, I know we're getting a little farther, Phil, from the budget, but this is going to come up because there was a number. Of course, Haiti was one of the big refugee um, um, groups that came in under the Biden administration. And
Yes.
that's one of those where there probably is, I mean, sending those people back to that hellscape that's modern Haiti is probably not feasible. But one of the resettlement towns, a lot of them were used in this, or a lot of them got jobs in these factories legally, right? They got legal job in this factory. They're in a town of like 4,000 people, and there's like 2,000 of them that were working at this. I can't remember what the plant was, but the business is basically going under, right? For nothing that had to do with the refugees. But now you have this massive refugee unemployed population in a small town in Ohio.
Oh no.
And like, are we saying the federal government somehow responsible for rehoming or rehousing those people? When it specifically put them into a very, I mean, it wasn't a bad idea at the time, right? But it's just a non-viable situation. And we wouldn't be having this if the Biden administration brought these people in and then held these, like you said, built the infrastructure and held these asylum meetings that they could start them on the naturalization process. But they
Yeah.
didn't do that.
So at the end of the day, I think I hope the court system makes a series of decisions that makes it very clear that any president, Democrat or Republican, anytime they do a policy change, it has to be justified and it has to be sort of tethered to reality. Insofar as, have you created legislation that can support it? Did you create a regulatory agency that can support this? And the idea that you're just going to wave a magic wand and create a computer app, which is something that millions of Americans can do, but go ahead and pass people through, but have no way to actually manage that level of growth. Somehow or another, we need to. I understand the president has that power to do that, but it has to be tethered to reality. Did you actually set up a system that can handle this new way of doing things? Like,
Well,
that should be sort of the standard, I think. And I hope
well,
that's what the court winds up saying.
my argument is the standard needs to be Congress needs to take that power back. I mean, I understand that there are some times when situations happen so fast that there's not a possibility for Congress to spend years debating whether the boat people or whether people who are impacted by the Indonesian tsunami in 2004 that were impacted in the 90s about Kosovo. I get that,
Yeah.
right? But in this case, this is another place where there's just a hole, right? The president actually can create that infrastructure. And that app that was set up was largely just set up to legally identify these people as asylum seekers, and therefore they're not technically illegal immigrants, right? Because there's a record they came in here through asylum. But in some cases, we're now 5 years into this process. And remember, naturalization, you have to be a resident for 5 years. And they haven't even they made no plan to hold any of the hearings.
Yeah.
Right. And it's sort of like, what are we doing? These people are just sort of in limbo. And that gets us back. That's where this immigrant issue is coming out so strongly here, I think, in the federal shutdown. Because one of the things is, again, the big, beautiful bill wanted to make sure that these hospital subsidies weren't going to that group. And part of where the Democrats have dug their heels in, this was directly in their counterproposal. So we saw Mike Johnson with the boards when he's been doing his press conference. They want to go back. The Democrats are demanding that sections of the bill, the big beautiful bill that was passed in July that impacted those groups, be repealed, before they'll have a vote to reopen the government on this one. So they're legislating something that happened in July that's already passed
Yep.
and trying to
So,
re-legislate it.
to me, this really is not a legitimate issue. You can take umbrage with that word or not, but it seems like it's mostly political posturing. And what I am trying to figure out is it seems like there's a Mexican standoff of sorts between the Democrat and Republican Party. And it's really about who's going to get blamed for this.
Right.
And I'm wondering, I mean, both sides are super confident that they're in the right and their messaging is good. And if I were the Democratic Party right now, coming off of that No Kings rally and nationwide, I would think the optics are in my favor. But the Republicans are certainly not going to move from their position. So at one point, one of these parties is going to seriously have egg on their face. Do you have any kind of idea of which way it's going to go?
Well, when I'm laughing at the term Mexican standoff, because of course we had those videos of Hakeem Jeffries wearing the sombrero. I'm like, okay.
Well, that meme that Trump put out. Because from the Republican side, the Democrats are being histrionic and ridiculous, which is why the sombrero and the funny things. They're like, they got nothing left except for to pull a stunt. That's really all they've got, and that was the point of the meme.
Well, I think the more disturbing thing, and again, this is my take. One of the more disturbing, budget or government shutdowns over to budget stuff is something that really has only emerged since the 90s, which is why you're seeing some people on the left blaming it on Newt Gingrich, who the contract with America from 94, right?
Clinton administration, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But I think there's a bigger issue on this, is that the fact that and again, this is touching a whole range of stuff. So the filibuster's important, why they need the 60 votes, right? If it was just a straight majority vote, which the Democrats, whenever Republicans are in power, they argue needs to be how the Senate operates, right? If that was in effect, like the Democrats wanted, this budget would have been passed because the Democrats just couldn't have stopped it, right? Because their 49 votes don't matter, or 47 or whatever it is they have, right? It just, with a simple majority, this would pass. But I think there is a question. I don't think this is working to the Democrats' advantage, right? The No Kings protest, we can maybe do an episode about that at some point, but I don't think they were as big, and I don't think the optics were as big as the Democrats were hoping. I also don't really think this is being driven simply by Schumer trying to fend off a primary challenge, right? Although there might be something to do with that. But I think the real problem is, in the past, these have largely, the pressure for the shutdown has gone against Republicans. And part of the reason it's gone against Republicans, I think, is that Republicans were always the ones to break first. They were able to pick off a number of the Republicans off this side. And so the appearance is, this is just some radicals in the Republican side that caused the shutdown. Right. One of the things I think Mike Johnson's done is actually kept his Republican caucus very closely aligned, and I think Thune has done so in the Senate. We're not seeing the shakiness. I mean, you have Paul Ryan, who voted against the continuing against the continuing resolution because he has some problems with the budget. So you have one Republican defector, for lack of a better term. But that's I think one of the things that's really happened is the Democrats all of a sudden have been faced with a Republican caucus that's far more unified than they have been in 30 years.
Yeah.
Now, one of the arguments is that's why, because honestly, Mike Johnson has nothing to do with this. It's past the House.
Right.
He can go back and reopen it and relitigate it at the Democrats' demand. But honestly, he really has nothing to do in passing it through the Senate. But I think part of why he shut down the Congress, so they're not doing any other activities, right, which is where Epstein and all this other stuff falls in. But the reason I think he's been doing those press conferences is what he's really doing is keeping a Republican majority unified. Right. And the more that goes on, the harder and harder it is. Well, we've already seen, going back to Nevada. This is a podcast about Nevada, right? Cortez Masto.
I was just going to talk about, we need to talk a little bit about how this is going to hit Nevada. But you go ahead, Cortez Masto.
Masto was one of the Democrats that's already voted in favor of the continuing resolution, and she's got an election campaign coming up in 2028, right? Yes. We're in one of those cycles where neither Nevada senators are eligible for a vote.
Yeah.
But the longer this goes on, Cortez Masto's looking at 2 years down the road and like, this could be a problem for me.
So I think Democrats have one shot to save face on this, and that is to go to a vote tomorrow and pass this. They've made their point with the King's rally, and they can leave with their head high, so to speak. But we've just passed some very interesting milestones where it's really going to start to hurt their constituencies, and I'm not entirely sure they'll survive it. If we get to the point where SNAP runs out of funding and people's SNAP cards stop working or not funding, I think that's the place where Democrats would have a very difficult time recovering. So I think we're at day 21 right this week, and those SNAP cards will run out. So my guess is the Democrats will pass it. They've made their point. They had a show of it, but real pain is at the end of this week if they don't pass it. Yeah.
And the pain issue is interesting for a couple reasons, I think. So yeah, you're partially right. Although one of the things that's been different also with previous shutdowns is we've heard a lot out of the Trump administration is cabinet officers that are looking for alternative sources of funding, right? For SNAP, what used to be called Snoop or food stamps, the Supplemental Nutritional Aid Program.
Yes, thank you for clarifying.
Women, infants, and children, that type of stuff. There was talk that some of this tariff money was going to be used. There's no way they can do that directly, right? But I think there is a possibility, and we see it most clearly with Pete Hegseth, the argument a couple weeks ago where Trump ordered Hegseth to find money to pay military personnel. And what they're going to do is they're just going to take money out of budgets that haven't been spent yet for whatever reason, right? Use that to pay the troops, and then when the government opens back up and that money becomes available, just restock those things, right?
Yeah. Or they could take out a loan. They certainly know people that could lend them the money.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure we want to get into that, but loans, one of the things that got us into the place, and that's been one of the big Republican arguments. We can't continue to do these subsidies and borrow that money in the financial markets. So I think at the end of the day, I agree with you somewhat. I think this is going to be resolved by this week. I think a point's been made. But that being said, I think there is going to be some lingering impacts. One of the things we were talking about is the Gwynn Center had that report on the federal footprint, because this is always one of the big things is that, if there's a government shutdown and most people's lives continue for 2, 3, 4 weeks, how vital is that government spending to begin with?
Yeah.
Right.
And so the state of Nevada, we have a budget, an entire budget, and a portion of that budget comes from the federal government. And so during the shutdown, they are missing those funds. And I think the biggest one, the most reliant one is it DHS here?
Department of Health and Human Services.
Yeah.
Which this is going to be one of the last, by the way, this is going to be one of the last times we can say that, because it's getting ready. One of the outcomes of the state legislatures, they're going to divide that in half.
Okay.
Right? So there's going to be a health department and human services, but that's just an aside.
I don't know about you, but I'm getting tired of people renaming stuff. Too much to keep up with.
Yeah. Well, according to the Gwynn Center, and if you don't know, the Kinney Gwynn Center is a nonpartisan research institute. It's named after the former Nevada governor, Kinney Gwynn, that produces a lot of big sort of analytical reports on education and economics. And in fact, I want to do a shout out. Their executive director, Jill Tolles, who was a former Republican assemblywoman. Jill and I have bumped into each other at research forums and stuff over the years. But her and her director of research, Michael Stewart, just came up and visited Elko here recently and sort of had a roundtable discussion with a lot of community leaders. I was lucky enough to be invited, talking about some of the rural issues we'd like the Gwynn Center to investigate. But as part of this, the Gwynn Center actually does a sort of look at the federal footprint, for lack of a better term, in Nevada, looking at the 2023 through 2025 bienniums, right?
Right.
And about 28% of Nevada's budget is federal funds, right? Which is, more than a quarter. That's important. DHHS is not actually the biggest. The three big groups are DHHS, right? So these are these healthcare subsidies, these are SNAP, these are WIC. Transportation, right? But again, transportation, you don't get federal funding for 3 weeks. What does that mean for your road projects? Nothing, right? If they have to delay for 3 weeks, is anybody going to notice on a 10-year road project, right?
Right.
But the big one in Nevada is actually USDA. That's the one that's
Okay.
been hit hard, right? And
Yes.
again, and because this is the time of season where a lot of agricultural businesses are taking out loans. All that's been stopped because that's a non-essential item. And there's been a lot of talk about the impact of that um, here in Nevada.
Mhm.
What's going to happen, even if this opens up next week, now you've got farmers that have taken on have interest things are piling up or had to delay projects. You do irrigation, right?
Yep. Yeah,
Project.
right now, so when you're in farming, most of your grant applications are due by October 31st, and it's kind
Mhm.
of chaotic right now for farmers and ranchers, because a lot of ranchers are farmers too.
Mhm.
Um, it's like, are they going to open back up in time to submit my application? And those deadlines are just twice a year, October 31st and probably March 31st or April 31st.
Yeah.
So, that you're going to miss your window for next season and you'll have to wait a whole year for any kind of grant that you could possibly get. And I'm not sure how they're going to handle that, but it's definitely our local concern in Northern Nevada from the ag
Well,
side.
and it's not just that the grants aren't going to be, because even if they open up this week, that deadline still stands. But what they've now missed is 3 weeks where they couldn't get somebody on the phone if they had a question
Yeah,
about doing that grant, right? Or couldn't get answers. You couldn't get answers to, okay, which forms do I need to have ready that might take 2 weeks for me to get from
right.
a financial institution.
Yeah.
So that's really where the impact is going to be, not the direct stuff. Um, I found something interesting because a lot of the stuff I'm seeing, just because of my background on this, is coming from the Native American side, because the
Oh,
USDA runs a lot of you know um, um, native agricultural loans, right?
yeah.
As
They
well,
have
so
a
they're
heavy federal footprint.
well. And what's interesting is one of the big ones. So Indian Health Service is probably one of the biggest federal programs, and they actually somehow got an advance on their fiscal year 26 budget. So
Okay.
Indian Health Service clinics aren't being impacted by this shutdown,
They're like, we're good.
which you're right.
Unless it goes into next year.
Yeah, well, no, the budget they were deciding that's being held up by October 1st starts the fiscal year 2026 on the government's time table, right?
Okay.
So we should be within the fiscal year 2026. But I do find it interesting that at least some of these services, enough people saw this coming down the pike that something like IHS was able to secure sort of pre-funding as a bulwark against this,
Yeah.
right? Which I think is another example that we're seeing of this being a political stunt, right? Because you have a potential constituency that was isolated from the effects,
Hmm.
right? And that's really odd. And not, we shouldn't be cutting any of the medical funding. I'm not talking about that at all. Um, we shouldn't have these budget cut shutdowns at all,
Yeah.
right? But it is sort of interesting that that particularly happened. Some of the other stuff that's going on, it's really hard to take. It has, of course, I work a lot in the grant world. That's having a big impact. Um,
Yeah.
you can't get questions answered. The military impact, I think, is relatively, I think it's less than they're making it out to be, right?
Mhm.
Even though that becomes a point, oh, they're trying to starve sailors. Of course, the civilian military workforce
Mhm.
is laid off, right? Or furloughed. But
Like National Guard?
no, no, no,
Or
no.
this is
I mean,
civilian?
like a lot of other places, even military bases might have civilian employees that are handling stuff like payroll, human resources,
Got it.
some type of in some cases, like specialized construction, electricians, plumbers, all those would have been civilian employees that are now furloughed, or if they were independent companies, now aren't getting paid for any projects, right? So
Yeah.
the lights go out in the barracks for an electrical problem, they can't call their civilian contractor to come in and fix it.
Yeah. So those federal contractors are really the ones that would probably get hit the hardest by the shutdown because it's
Hmm.
not they don't have a guaranteed income. It's just
Right.
subcontracting. Right.
Um, and those things aren't going to show up in any type of economic data for 6 or 8 months. So we're not going to
Yeah.
see the damage of this for a while. So,
Yeah, and it's interesting because the country's been so politicized. It's kind of difficult to suss out the data, and it's like the FAA. We're having reports of lower turnout at work, and the FAA is also like, we have a higher rate of people calling in sick than since the government shut down, which tells you that's more pain, but politicized pain. Like, they could
Right.
be showing up to work. They do know they're going to get their paycheck eventually. It's the U.S. government. If you don't, we're the number one country
Well,
in the world. You're gonna get your check.
I could be wrong, but I think air traffic controllers are essential personnel, so they were getting
Mhm.
paid anyway, right?
Yeah,
Remember, it's something ridiculous. Like, it's over half the federal government's considered essential and
sure.
aren't impacted by the shutdown. They'll keep paying them. Um, now, TSA, I don't know about. Now, of course, the air traffic controllers have a long history since, the 80s when Ronald Reagan, when they tried to go on strike, and Reagan's like, that's it, and just fired them all. Right. We can't have you shut down the nation's air grid on a contract negotiation. That's just ridiculous. And that's really the final aspect of this that's interesting is that with this shutdown, we're starting to see some trimming of the federal government.
I was just going to ask you about that, because that was the other talking point with Democrats, was that Trump's going to use this. Say, well, Trump shut down the government so he could fire a bunch of people. Is there what's the kernel of truth at the bottom of that barrel?
Well, no, they are using it right now. I don't think he generated the shutdown.
No, I
Uh,
don't either.
But I think a large part of the problem on that aspect is the fact that another problem we're having is it's not really sure who has the power. We've got a number of cases about this that are now starting to work through the Supreme Court. You have members of the executive branch, people in positions that the argument has been, well, Congress created those positions, so the president can't do anything about them. So you have a chief executive officer who can't exercise executive authority over his own branch. How does that work? Right? Um, but what happens is with the government shutdown, that brings a lot of stuff in that Congress has already said the president can do.
Yeah,
So, now they can claim it was in the Heritage's Project 2025 or whatnot all they want, but the truth is this is another power the president probably definitely has, and he can legally use it.
yeah.
Now we'll see those people are going to sue, right?
Mhm.
And we'll have another round of court cases that are going to come out of this.
Yeah.
But I would suspect that this is going to be another example where this is probably going to be a negative loss for the Democrats.
Yeah, and in general, we really need Congress to step back up and really balance out the other two branches. It's really disjunctive for a business person to be under Biden and then under Trump, and I mean, it's wildly different policies, and you have to almost retool your business every time there's a different person in office, and I'm just going to say it's annoying because I don't want to use a harsher word, but I guess I'll say it's really irresponsible. Somehow we've got to get our government balanced back out.
Mhm.
Do you think this government shutdown will contribute to that in the long run, or no? Is it?
Well, I think it's going to depend because one of the things that's interesting to me is, I've mentioned that one of the things the Republicans had managed to do was get the 12 regular budget bills done by mid-September,
Mhm.
right? This is really a last gasp measure. Now, one of the things that's happened in the past is not even those 12 bills were done. So, like we saw last year, they're still trying to get a basic budget package together, the 7 months ago when the last continuing clean resolution was passed by the Democrats.
What are we
I,
paying these people for?
well, that's a whole nother question.
What do
But I
they
think,
do? What do Congress people do exactly?
well, I think this is actually an interesting point because I think one thing that I haven't seen a lot of people talk about goes directly to that. And that is the fact, you know, if they get a negotiation done by the Thanksgiving break, and I think Mike Johnson's even willing to maybe, drag out these negotiations. And again, that continuing resolution just says we're going to keep funding at the old level until we get this worked out. So
Mhm.
there's no loss on the Democratic side, except for they can't go back and withdraw those provisions that are already put in place by the big beautiful bill while those negotiations are going, which is why there is a bit of a truth to this immigrant
Yeah.
debate. But the thing that gets me is, say they get the 12 budget bills passed by the Christmas break in December. It's 6 months before they have to do the next budget.
Hmm.
Congress, for the first time in years, has a period where they don't have a budget battle they're fighting.
Don't say.
And Well, and I think that was part of the plan because they actually will have the time instead of these long, drawn out, ridiculous budget battles that go on well after when the budget's supposed to be done. I think you might actually see a much more activist Congress that starts to close some of these lacunas, some of these loopholes, some of these problems that have developed as it's let its authority go away.
Yeah.
And part of me wonders if that's really what the Democrats are afraid of, right? Is that they might have a Republican dominated House and Senate that could actually do something legally in terms
Yeah.
of rolling back regulations and changing how Washington's worked now for 50, 60, 70 years,
Yeah.
and make some real changes. And this is really their last opportunity
Yeah.
to sort of drag them down into another, because nothing got done last year because of the budget battle, right?
Well, I
Um,
mean, they're definitely making the statement that the old way of doing things is not the good way of doing things. They want to move the country in a different direction. However, you want to label that. So yeah, getting back to business as usual is the worst case scenario for them because they didn't like it. They're trying to change it. So yeah, I
well,
mean that's why we're at such a ridiculous standoff. Is like they're like, no, we want to hold on to all the changes we were making, and Trump's like, no, we're going back to the way things were, and it's going to be civil, and we're going to talk to each other, and we're going to actually run a country like we should. You know?
Well, yeah, and I don't think it's the way things were. I think what we will see is that a lot of the stuff that came out of the Doge thing will start making its way through Congress because that's what everybody's been saying. Well, if they want to cut this, they need to go through Congress. The president can't do it. Well, Congress was bound up all last year with this ridiculous budget battle, right? Um, and now that they don't have that budget battle, you might see Congress doing stuff like rescinding that refugee status law, right? Where it has to be Congress that approves who gets refugee status. You might see them closing various loopholes on who's eligible for federal programs. You
Yeah.
might see them impose some of these cuts where they permanently shut down something like USAID, actually go through Congress and say some of these programs we're not going to support anymore, they're done. And that's 100% within Congress's purview to do so.
Yeah, and I'm biased, but can we please get a farm bill?
Well, that's one we probably disagree on a bit, right? But yeah, I got a feeling, like I said, I think the shutdown will be done soon, but I think the damage is going to it's going to take a couple months for us to figure out which
Yeah.
side won or lost. But I
Yeah.
just don't see it looking good for the Democrats right now.
Feels pretty high stakes, but we got a long runway to go for the midterms, so I'm gonna
Right.
save all my excitement
Well,
for
if nothing else,
a few months more. At least I'm gonna get through like primaries before I get excited. But
we have plenty of memes to entertain us.
that's right.
Right. The sombrero meme with Hakeem Jeffries.
Oh, we got to close with that.
Oh, you want to close with that?
I do.
But you happen to like the sombrero meme that they put out with.
I love it because it puts a fine point on everything we're talking about. Because this is, in my opinion, it's an illegitimate reason to shut down the government. And Trump's poking back, saying this is ridiculous. I'm not going to give you any credit whatsoever. This is a ridiculous thing to do.
And then you had the whole thing. I thought it was and I'm actually not in favor of the White House doing this. They've got better things to do, and this is a waste of time. But that being said, I think a couple of things is not only is it sort of funny, but it also brings up a very interesting case of the deep fake issue, right? Because they put these words into Schumer's mouth that match fairly well. Now, it's obviously not a deep fake, right? Where you have Hakeem Jeffries in that ridiculous sombrero and mustache looking like Speedy Gonzalez.
Well,
right?
then of course, the Democrats held a press conference and treated it as if it was possibly to be interpreted as real. And it was like, gosh dang it, you guys are ridiculous.
Right. And it can't, but it does get, because that section where Schumer's speaking is actually very well synced. Right. Now, granted, it's part of the reason is just angle and shot and everything, and Schumer sort of got his heads down, so you can't really see how the mouth is moving. But still, I think it's interesting for that point. We'll see if we get more of those.
Yeah.
So,
When have we ever had a president like that? That's wild. I still gotta kind of think about that. I mean, we're used to Trump pulling these kind of things, but it's wild we have a president who would put out a meme like that.
right. Well, so we're probably going to be doing a couple more of these on Zoom. Got some interviews lined up, but it's going to be a couple weeks before I get back down in Vegas. And so, look for some big stuff. I will say we're going to be, we've already booked an appearance on Talk with a Conservative, another radio show podcast out of Vegas, beginning of December. So we'll have some more information about that. Patricia and Garland Brinkley. We're sort of sussing out what we want to talk about on their show. But in the meantime, if you have any comments, want to disagree with us, take me to task for my history, whatever, go ahead and shoot us an email at info@775alive.com. Until then, I'm Scott Gavorski.
And I'm Crystal Newton.
We'll see you around the 775.